Chapter 15. A Nightclub Spit-Spat. Shortly after the end of his publicity tour with Barbara, Franchot landed in a particularly humiliating spot of trouble back in Hollywood when he had a run-in at a Sunset Strip nightclub with catty syndicated gossip columnist Floribel Muir. A portly, middle-aged shrew with scarlet hair and a serpent's tongue, Muir, whose writing style, like her more celebrated contemporaries Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons, consisted of 1 part pious self-righteousness with 2 parts venom, had been especially critical of Franchot, Barbara, and Tom in her newspaper column, announcing in one edition that she was, quote, sick and tired of their juvenile and rather perverse antics. On the evening of October 29th, Franchot had taken Barbara and his mother Gertrude to dinner at his favorite haunt, Ciro's, when he saw Muir dining with her husband, writer Denny Morrison, and her assistant, Betty Voigt. Greatly emboldened by the warm wash of alcohol coursing through his system, Franchot left Barbara and his mother and approached Muir's table to confront her. Incensed with her for her repeated attacks on his character, and in particular for the obvious disdain she had shown Barbara, Franchot grabbed Muir's hand and asked her, "Floribel, darling, is Morrison your doctor or your psychiatrist?" When assured by the stunned woman that she and Morrison were wed, Franchot asked, "Have you got your wedding certificate with you?" Muir responded that she didn't normally carry the document with her, but that she would send him a copy of it if he was that interested in seeing it. "I couldn't be more uninterested," Franchot answered. Sensing his annoyance with her, Muir provoked him with a coy dig. "Why, Franchot, you talk as though you're mad at me." The actor admitted, "Yes, I am. So mad, in fact, that I could just spit in your face." Without missing a beat, he added, "In fact, that's just what I'm going to do." Then, while holding Muir's hand, Franchot leaned across the table and made good on his promise, hitting the wicked old crone squarely in the eye in the process. In her published rehash of the incident, the newswoman groused, "He then grabbed me by my 3-strand pearl necklace and tried to choke me by making a tourniquet of the pearls, at the same time tromping on my right instep and kicking me viciously about the feet, ankles, and shins. At first I thought he was just stumbling, then noticed he was deliberately kicking. So I lifted my foot and gave him my right heel." Veteran Herald-Examiner reporter James Bacon was among the industry people at Ciro's that night and claimed to have witnessed the altercation. He said, "Tone walked over and bent down in a gesture which looked to me at first as if he were going to kiss Floribel. In a moment, all hell broke loose." That's putting it mildly. As the nightclub's orchestra filled the room with soothing music to dine by, the incident quickly escalated, with Muir flailing away at Franchot, while Denny Morrison, in an attempt to strike his wife's attacker, somehow missed his target and landed on his derriere. Barbara, who was for once exempt from the fisticuffs, and the dignified Gertrude Tone, not to mention an entire roomful of studio big shots, surely looked on in awe at a confrontation that had all the earmarks of your average barroom brawl, the only difference being in its unlikely opponents, the erudite movie star and the corpulent matron, carrying on in a bizarre slapstick scene that played like an outtake from a Marx Brothers film. A jarring blend of horrified gasps and wicked peals of laughter were said to have reverberated through the room, followed by far less dignified grunting noises from a panting Floribel Muir. The row was ended within minutes when Ciro's dinner captain, Don Avalier, interceded and grabbed Franchot around the waist. Foaming and pasty-mouthed from the booze, Franchot was led back to his table where a sympathetic Barbara and his mother embraced him. Muir, with her public embarrassment surpassed only by her righteous indignation, took advantage of her position as police reporter for the LAPD's West Hollywood Sheriff's Office and immediately called the department to file a citizen's arrest against her assailant on charges of assault and battery. Upon the officer's arrival, Muir demanded they body search Franchot, adding, in a conspiratorial stage whisper, "Quick, before he hides the marijuana cigarettes under the table." James Bacon wrote that when Muir's assistant, Betty Voigt, suggested that her boss charge Franchot with spitting in a public place, Muir bellowed, Since when in hell has my face become a public place?" In her subsequent statement to the police, Muir explained the reason for her suspicions regarding Franchot's level of sobriety. "He came over to our table with a great show of cordiality," she began. "But then he began talking wildly and aimlessly. All the time he was holding onto my hand and glaring at me with a strange glazed look in his eyes. The pupils of his eyes were distended, and they didn't seem to be focusing. He didn't appear to be under the influence of liquor, but he certainly wasn't acting like a man in possession of his normal senses. His conversation was rambling, his eyes beady, bloodshot, and baggy. At no time did he tell me what he was mad about." Irate at Muir's assumption that he was under the influence of illegal narcotics, Franchot insisted that he be taken to Los Angeles Emergency Hospital and tested for drugs. After it was determined, through a full examination, that there were no drugs in his system, Franchot was booked and spent the night in the county jail. The next morning's newspapers seemed to derive great joy in reporting the melee, crisply referred to in various articles as, quote, "a salivary tussle, a spittle tiff, an unsanitary shower bath, an unexpected expectoration, and a nightclub spit-spat." In fact, Muir made haste to dispense the news herself in her column. "Battling Franchot Tone, who was KO'd a few weeks ago by actor Tom Neal, apparently is looking for softer adversaries since that experience. He took me on last night at Ciro's. Going about spitting in people's faces could be a dangerous pastime. He just might meet up with another Neal." Later that day, looking haggard and weary after his night behind bars, Franchot was regaled by reporters chanting, "For he's a jolly good fellow," as he entered Beverly Hills Justice Court with his lawyer, Stanley Glees. Once inside the courtroom, Franchot pled not guilty to Muir's charges of assault and battery, and was later freed on $500 bail by Judge Henry H. Drager, who set a misdemeanor trial date for December 11th. The viperous Floribel Muir often utilized her L.A. Mirror newspaper column, Floribel Muir Reporting, to sanctimoniously dispense her anal retentive homilies to her loyal readers, and was certainly not going to deny herself the opportunity to discuss this latest incident in print. "She was the bitch queen of them all," remembers Barbara's future acquaintance, RKO contract player Bill Ramage. "Of the three hag columnists of the day, Luella Parsons, Hedda Hopper, and Muir, Floribel was easily the nastiest. Hedda, at least, had a sense of humor. With a little care and some ass-kissing, she could be defanged. The very Catholic Luella Parsons, on the other hand, was a sot. Always drunk, often out of it, and incontinent to boot. In fact, she was known to leave her tiny little puddles behind in restaurants and offices all over Hollywood. Floribel Muir wasn't as powerful as the other two bitches, but she walked the police beat, and she knew how to get her boys to swat a pretty mean nightstick. Quite simply, she was a vulture." In her October 31st column, Muir wrote, "I deeply regret becoming involved in the unsavory affairs of Tone and his bride, Barbara Payton. I have no stomach for mixing it in the gutter with anyone. But I believe I have a right to go about my newspaper business without being required to wear a waterproof veil over my face when encountering persons about whom I have written. When I first knew Tone in Hollywood, he was a handsome, upstanding fellow, displaying at all times a brilliant mind and charming manners. What has happened to him in the last few months is as big a mystery to me as to all his friends and acquaintances. It all began when I refused to treat his love battle with Tom Neal seriously. To me, it was a silly exhibition that reflected no glory on either him or that girl he married. I was prepared to drop my complaint had he exhibited the slightest regret for his gutter-snipe behavior. He admitted spitting at me, but he denied kicking me in the shins. If he is unaware of his rough foot play, he shouldn't be at large. He might inflict other painful injuries on me or someone else without knowing what he is doing." The biddy's noble and unctuous platitudes, though cringe-inducing now, were at the time followed as closely as those of her acid-tongued peers, and brought Franchot, and Barbara too through association, only further public disgrace. The Floribel Muir fiasco finally ended on December 11th when Franchot was fined $400 and given a suspended jail sentence of 45 days after pleading guilty to the charge of battery. Municipal court judge Henry Drager dismissed the assault count against the actor after Franchot mustered up all his decorum and insisted, "Your Honor, I did not kick the complainant and I did not use any vile language. However, I do admit I may have lost my sense of proportion and my sense of good conduct." As the L.A. Daily News reported, the recipient of Tone's spittle and ultimate apology was not in court, but was duly represented by her attorney, S.S. Hahn. In the weeks that followed, Floribel Muir openly declared war on both Franchot and especially Barbara, whom she had long despised. Muir had the backing of both Hopper and Parsons, and the trio took every available opportunity thereafter to crucify Franchot and Barbara in print. Only Walter Winchell and the blonde columnist Sheila Graham seemed to have any sympathy for Barbara, says Bill Ramage. The rest of the Hollywood gossip scribes loathed her. Walter Winchell was a good friend of mine. He was a kind man, and I know that he adored Barbara. As for Sheila Graham, she lived openly with F. Scott Fitzgerald for years and loved sex herself, so she definitely understood Barbara. When all was said and done, the entire incident with Floribel Muir proved a humiliation to all involved, and was a conspicuous blight on Franchot Tone's already marred reputation. To make matters even worse, by the time the suit was resolved in December, his troubled wife had collected yet another round of negative headlines and was back in court again. Jan Redfield admits, "With Barbara, it was always just one thing after the next. Things had to be jumping all the time. There was never any rest for her, no peace and quiet. She was hooked on making these scenes. It was very exhausting." The circus ride Barbara was on continued to spin at a breakneck pace, and though she didn't know it, her film career at Warner Brothers was spinning too, right into oblivion.